Welcome back to the Cancelled series. Now, I've handled a good chunk of cancelled productions in the past, to the point that I stopped doing these, thinking I had pretty much reached the bottom of the barrel. Fast forward to last month and there was one last squeak of content with a whole breadth of content to talk about. The Cancelled series is officially revived. And then I looked into what was next, and I was right. What's left of unfinished movie productions is stub articles and minimal details. So for this installment, I'm gonna test out a slightly new spin by introducing you to 3 cancelled movies all at the same time. Not enough each for an individual video, but maybe together. So let's start off with the Plants vs. Zombies movie, which was yet another unfinished project being helmed over at DreamWorks. These guys seem to have an endless barrage of movies under the wing, and some of them are the best we've ever seen. And yet, here is just another one. Coming off of the hype of the video games, no, not this one from 2015, it was said to be a full feature project with the foundational roots of a well-established IP. Okay, so this video game specifically is not the direct and only reference for the movie's conception. However, the original Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare game did release in 2014, and a sequel, which you'll never guess the title of, it was Garden Warfare 2, came out in 2016. So this project very much fits in between them. Now, the original pitch of this animated feature was to simply be a film adaptation of the franchise as a whole, and DreamWorks Animation were the ones to bite. Whether that would have focused perhaps on Crazy Dave and his antics defending his home or his van, or a much larger scale of war movie between factions of zombies and plants, is yet to be known, since there were no details shared over the actual plot of the movie. Only the murmur of how the zombie outbreak started, which apparently goes as follows. A human ate some contaminated hot dogs while visiting the carnival with his family. Then, he becomes a zombie and began to infect everyone. And that's it. But we do know that one of the crew members on board with this project was none other than Roy Lee, creative director behind Lego Movie 2, which could have opened up some interesting creative spin on the adaptation. But we don't know for certain. But what we did get was a handful of concept art that we could dissect next. But before we get properly into that, let's switch on over to our second cancelled production from another noteworthy animation studio, Blue Sky Studios. Though in the past we discussed their prior works such as Nimona and... well, actually, that's the only one we've covered. Apparently, there is also Robots 2 and Rio 3. With Nimona being a project that did, in fact, get a revival release in the form of a Netflix pickup, perhaps this one has a hint of a chance too, as it's another sequel to a pretty well-liked movie, I believe. It's the Peanuts movie 2. See, this was a pretty standard 3D adaptation of the classic and beloved animated TV series, and from what I can tell from reviews, seemed decent. Obviously, there wouldn't be any crazy changes in character work, and the story would assuredly be pretty on brand to get that well-received treatment, and at most, their only really negative thing may come from the fact that the original was not a 3D animation, and some might choose to describe this movie as a little flat looking a little weird and all that. But if it gets the profits, it gets the profits. Bringing a more archaic franchise back into the limelight seems like a pretty decent idea for a studio wanting to make an easy and decent success, right? Well, there weren't any blockades to stop them from doing what they were already doing at first, as after the release of the Peanuts movie 1, there were plans for a sequel film. And considering this initial movie was also its own original story with some familiar set pieces, it could be assumed that this sequel movie would have followed the same trend too. But much like the Plants vs. Zombies project, no official details regarding the plot were actually shared, just that it was conceptualized as part of the plan at first. But before we touch on who would have been involved and what their history is, let's take one more detour to our third movie on the block, the Shrek movie. Now, don't worry, I'm not talking here about the 5th Shrek movie. That's still going on, apparently. What I'm talking about is the cancelled Shrek 1 movie. Yes, they cancelled it. It doesn't exist. Your entire understanding of meme culture is a dream. Wake up! Now, what I'm really referring to is the original pitch of the first Shrek movie that fully started going into production and was later dynamically changed into the far more familiar version we all know today. But originally, and we're talking mid to late 90s here, Shrek wasn't looking quite so ugh-lovable, but instead looked like this. Woof. Ironically, far more fitting for the themes of the Shrek story, but a little extra away from the movie industry beauty standards. See, it wasn't always gonna be Mike Myers, beyond just at one point doing a West Country accent in the early days of the 2001 version. Before him, it was set to be cast as Chris Farley. And more so than that, it was a collaborative project being covered by Universal Pictures and Amblimation, since DreamWorks wasn't properly established yet, and later on, all 250 Amblimation employees would migrate over to that studio. Anyway, this adaptation was set to be a more direct adaptation of William Steig's Shrek book. According to Chris Farley's brother in a Yahoo interview in 2015, 20-ish years later, originally the Shrek character was a little bit more like Chris, like a humble, bumbling, innocent guy, as opposed to the more aggroed defensive guy that Mike Myers' version came out to be, as it was much more sculpted around the talent they planned to have in the starring roles. Interesting. I wonder how different the overall story could have turned out with this character design. Or we really have to go on our animation tests and found footage, but it's an interesting thought experiment. We'll cover those in a little bit. But before we delve into that, let's look at the proper details we do have for the Plants vs. Zombies movie. And also, while you're here at the midpoint of the video, subscribe if you haven't already. We got all sorts of cancelled episodes for you to digest, and I'm still open for more. Though maybe I'll be more likely to compartmentalize them into trios going forward if there's little to go on. Anyway, let's go on with that Plants vs. Zombies project. As though we weren't given an established plot and instead just a gigantic franchise with like over 100 characters and references they can pull from, no matter which line of logic they run under, what we do have as a direct source of information can come in the form of the concept art released alongside this hidden Plants vs. Zombies news. Starting off with this gigantic piece that tells us all sorts of details. And I mean, for a start, it's not just a simple protect your home kind of movie, since we're very clearly out and about in a giant greenhouse. On the move as our remaining human characters have portable weapons to push them forwards. See, there's Crazy Dave, and this kid could potentially be someone we already know. Apparently, in the Plants vs. Zombies comics, there's an 11-year-old boy genius, Nate Timely, an adventuring kid able to reverse engineer the technology of one of the boss zombie enemies, and his favorite plant is the pea shooter, so it could be very fitting. We can then also spot this little baby dude off to the side that I don't think we do recognize. There's a small handful of human characters we could maybe expect to see in this feature. Not that any would really match the baby here. Bert could maybe be the closest, but otherwise there is Dottie, Matilda, Officer Ron, Patrice. I think there's also Penny, who you only see inside of a car. And all sorts of these characters would comfortably fit in the full-length story, if required. And then on the plant front, only the pea shooter has the most faithful model design, at least to the app. This could very well just be a concept art thing, or could be more emblematic of the garden warfare aesthetic. Moving on, yeah, far more garden warfare in design. Demonstrably, it would have boiled down into a proper all-out war. Actually, this looks sick. It's a really compelling idea if the visuals were to be in any way influenced by this direction, with a new tiny person in blue down out front. And finishing up, we have this low-res picture of the disco zombie and other alternatives coming out in the more nighttime horrific version of that same greenhouse. It's classic, it's standard, but it tells an impressive picture for the visuals of how this movie could have been. And considering this project rose up during the same time as the Minecraft movie and the FNAF movie, maybe now some execs will have their sights on a project like this again in the hunt for the next major fan game niche to hop onto. But it was cancelled, and the reasons as to why we will get to later on. First, let's return to Peanuts Movie 2. So though the plot was unknown and it was likely just following the coattails of the original movie, there were some limitations to making a sequel production. For a start, Fox, despite garnering a success and reportedly interested in making a sequel to turn this movie into a franchise, was only granted the rights to one Peanuts film, with them indicating in 2015 that a sequel was not imminent, and that this one took 8 years, so maybe we'll talk again then. However, if you're keeping track of studios and dates, you would probably predict why this movie was officially cancelled, as Blue Sky Studios themselves closed down, halting any further conversations from there. Director Rod Bottiglier would go on to make Snoopy in Space on Apple TV Plus instead, so the spirit still lives on. That being said, there's still a remnant of a revival, as soon as August 2023, the co-producer of the film and son of Charles Schulz, creator of Peanuts, stated that another theatrical film was not off the table. But it being Blue Sky and looking exactly like this, is likely not going to be the case. Let's move on to the original Shrek 1 movie once again, whereby though this movie was designed and we know who was attached and all that, once again a prediction could be made based entirely on dates, as the cancellation of this movie came from one of the more unexpected sources. Chris Farley died in 1997. A shock tragedy due to drug overdose completely dismantled this version of the movie to be entirely redone from the ground up. And in that 2015 Yahoo interview again, Chris's brother Kevin said the studio needed to do what they needed to do. It was a bad time, bad timing, a tragedy. Mike did a great job with Shrek. He knocked it out of the park. And that is the timeline we're on. Shrek's appearance was changed because it was considered too creepy for children, apparently. And when Mike Myers was brought onto the project, reportedly he didn't want to do someone else's version, so he asked for the script to be rewritten, and that's where the final version of Shrek was formed. Not certain if that point is entirely correct. I'd be surprised to hear just one actor has that much influence on an animated script, but the outcome is very much still the same. Amblimation was then shut down in 1997 following the box office failure of Balto to be liquidated into DreamWorks, and the voice of Fiona was also replaced out of respect for Farley's death, giving Janine Garofalo's role to Cameron Diaz. Similarly, so did Steve Martin as Donkey. That was apparently a thing. Not to Cameron Diaz. And with the original pitch to have this whole movie done in 2D at first, on the whims of some DreamWorks execs, it became a 3D animated film instead. And all the better for it, I'd say. However, in 2015, Chris Farley's voice recordings resurfaced, so here's a little preview of that for sticking around with us out to this point.
You're just displacing your anger.
Believe me, it's properly placed.
You're really mad at whoever did this to you.
No one did anything to me.
Yes. Someone hurt you so bad. Someone hurt you many years ago.
Leave my parents out of this!
Noticeably different approach. Interesting, nonetheless. And finally, as we loop back around to Plants vs. Zombies, I can now confirm to you that this DreamWorks movie was cancelled too. Surprise. Though the reasons for it are a little muddied. Stopped for some unknown reason. Apparently there are assumptions that this could have possibly been too scary or violent for kids, but I don't believe that at all. Regardless, whatever form or lore it chose to jump off from, the film was permanently cancelled and shelved, staying as a video game franchise of course, with no animation movies at all. At most, maybe some animated trailer ad spots. I should look into more of those. As Plants vs. Zombies stays as it is today. Vaguely relevant, until some exec comes to bring it back from the dead, hopping off of the success of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie or something. But there you are, there were 3 cancelled animated productions that have been lost to time. Interesting, perhaps with some potential, but that is all there is to dissect and discuss for today. So for now, my name's been Daz. Let me know if you'd like to see more trio cancelled episodes, or if I should just cull the series here until the next big news or something. I can adapt. You didn't really care, and I'll see you in a little bit.